One of the things I've been thinking about recently, partly because about language, but other things as well, is to do with well, the amount of nouns we have in our language. You know what I mean? And how language maps onto experience of the world. Because here we are, we're kind of, what is it Dawkins says, medium-sized objects moving at medium speed. That's kind of what we are. You know, halfway between the size of an ant and the size of a mountain. And you know, here we are moving at the speed we move at. And particular things come out of that scale and speed. You know, there's a particular physics that we operate at. You know, we operate in a world largely of Newtonian physics, don't we, I think? You know, we don't know much about, we know about it, but we don't experience the physics of the very large, and we don't experience the physics of the very small. And we don't experience the physics of the very fast. We live in this little land, you know, middle world, I think Dawkins calls it, you know, and we're very familiar with the customs of this particular land that we live in, of the middle size, middle speed thing. And I think that's reflected, well, it's certainly reflected in our experience. You know, we have the sensory apparatus and the cognitive apparatus to interpret the physics of this world quite well, and our language seems to express that physics as well in some ways, or express our interpretation of that physics. Because at this speed it makes sense, and this size, it makes sense to think of the world as consisting of a bunch of objects separated by expanses of space. You know, so here I am in this wood, and look at all those trees. All those trees, all like objects, you know, like fixed in space and separated by expanses of space. And all these objects are variously hard or soft or resilient or bendy or whatever, you know. They all have kind of object-like properties. And the space is just a substrate that these things are embedded within. The emptiness. And my cognitive apparatus and my sensory apparatus is designed by evolution to function within that kind of a physical landscape. You know, so I see these objects as objects, and I feel them as hard or soft or resilient or bendy, and you know, all the rest of that stuff. But that's you know, the interpretation, the physiological and perceptual and sensory interpretation of medium-sized physics, Newtonian physics largely. At different scales and speeds it would be different. It wouldn't make any sense at all to talk about objects if you were the size of a subatomic particle. I mean, obviously we can't be, but you know, there's no such thing as an object at that scale. Suddenly it doesn't make any sense to talk about objects and space. You know, the space that separates these objects. It doesn't make any sense to talk about that if you're the size of a galactic cluster. You know, it just doesn't make sense. That those are meaningless concepts at that scale. And similarly, if you're fast, you know, if you're approaching the speed of light, again, it makes no sense to talk about objects and space. Because apart from everything else, space is indistinguishable from time. Come on, Pops! And I imagine the same is probably true. I don't know this for a fact. I imagine the same is probably true if you're completely sessile, you know, if you're just stationary for millions and millions of years. I guess it would make no sense then to talk about space and objects. So those, you know, those terms and that experience of hard or soft objects existing within the substrate of an intervening and enclosing space is a product of our interpretation of the physics that operates at medium size, medium speed. And I think the same is true of our language. You know, to the extent that our language tries to model the world, shape the world, do things within the world, communicate experience to ourselves, do all that kind of stuff that language does. Put feelers out into the world. Does a similar thing. You know, we have these verbs and we have these nouns and we have these prepositions, and these nouns, these object-like words, you know, words like tree, just sit there in the middle of the language, and they're connected by all these prepositions like on and in and next to. I'm not sure if that's a preposition or not, but You know, those kind of prepositional phrases which articulate the relationships between objects in some kind of linguistic space. Again, just describe it doesn't describe exactly, but it kind of models parts of the world. Not all of it, but it kind of models parts of the world, I think. So you can't really use natural language to step outside of physics, or if you try to, it gets tricky. Like if you try to talk about quantum physics, or if you try to talk about astrophysics, or you try to talk about the speed of light in natural language, it all gets very clunky, because you're using language, Newtonian language, to talk about Einsteinian concepts. So it's all gonna be a bit of a mismatch there, isn't it, really? It's all gonna get a bit pear-shaped really quick. I know there are, and I've done this myself, there are experiments that have been done about trying to model different languages, or try to just try to think in terms and speak in ways which do something different. Like, for example, suppressing nouns. And there are some languages in the world which use far less nouns than English does. I don't know what those are, unfortunately, right now, but I did read about this one. You know, where lots more experiences are expressed as if they were verbs, as if they were things that are happening, rather than objects that exist. I guess kind of being is kind of one of those. You know, we talk about beings, human beings, as if a human being was an object, which they kind of are. But being is a verb, so if you focus attention on the being bit, it does change your perception slightly. But there are, as I say, there are languages which do that much more radically. And there are artificial languages. I think in one of Borges's stories, Tlon Uqbar something, it's in Labyrinth, there's a reference to a language which has no nouns in it, which is just entirely verbs. Many years ago I wrote a few poems in which all the nouns were eradicated and replaced by verbs. Again, it's quite interesting as a kind of mental exercise to do that for a bit, you know, just to think in terms of a verbal language, bring out that kind of conceptualization in your head a bit, focus attention on that kind of conceptualization. Just changes your mindset a wee bit, that's all. I don't think we could ever become Einsteinian thinkers. I don't think we could ever think our way into thinking like, you know, think our way into the world of the quantum, or thinking our way into the world of the galactic cluster, or the world of the light speed thing. Yeah, but at least we can recognise our own embeddedness. You know what I mean? The fact that our language and our thought evolved in a medium-sized, medium-speed world, and chugs along at medium-sized, medium speed. You know, our concepts are medium-sized, medium speed. So a lot of our efforts are really like, you know, trying to do, you know, thinking really is trying to do a Large Hadron Collider, trying to do that kind of process using a steam engine to do it. Medium-sized physics, trying to do quantum-sized calculation. Look at this tree, birch, gorgeous tree. I'll just point it upwards for the final shot of this video.